I have put together. Oh,
Yes, you are. So welcome everybody. And Lauren, I'm going to let you take from here and you can share your screen.
great. Can folks see that? Let's see here. There we go. All right. Can folks see that now?
We can.
Great. And when I scroll it, scrolling perfect. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you, Lynn, for that introduction. I'm Lauren Lehman and I'm here with Diane LaFale. Diane is our everyday licensing administrator for the social work professions. And I'm sure many of you have interacted with her. She is a great resource we have at the Office of Professional Regulation, really knowledgeable about the rules and the processes and always available to help. I am a staff attorney with our general counsel unit. We have at OPR, we have a prosecution unit over on what we call the other side of the office because it is literally behind a wall on the other side. And but my role as a staff attorney is to work with the professions and licensees to help understand the rules, understand the processes, and also revise rules as necessary, work on statutes as well. And other lawmaking processes and rulemaking as well. So I'm here today to talk you through our licensing process. I know it's complicated, particularly in this profession when we get to supervision hours. I'm just going to walk through this PowerPoint. I'm happy to provide this as a resource afterwards, and so folks have it for reference. All right, and we'll start. I've also included Diane and my email addresses at the bottom. So we're available anytime. Please feel free to reach out to us. As Lynn said, we have about 50 professions and about 90,000 or 70,000 licensees in the state right now. So we do our best to get back to you within 2 to 3 days of hearing from you. If we haven't gotten back to you, it might be because your question is very complicated and we're trying to figure it out ourselves, but feel free to call us or email us and we'll work through it with you. So welcome everybody. I wanted to start by just pointing out the resources that are out there for you to reference. And they include our OPR website, the social worker section of that website, 26, and these are the citations to the statutes and rules applicable to social workers. So 26 VSA chapter 61 is specific to social workers. It's your specific how to get a social work license chapter in the statutes. From that, we call that, I kind of like to think of those statutes as the outline, that those are set by the General Assembly, the legislature. OPR has no authority to change those. If it's in those statutes, you have to go get a new law made if you want to change them. Where we do have more authority are in the administrative rules for social workers. I think of that as kind of coloring in the lines that are drawn by the statute outline. And that is where OPR sets rules. We do that through a rulemaking process that's established in law. And we do that in collaboration with our advisors, through public meetings, through stakeholders like the National Association for Social Workers and the public and licensees. Finally, there's 3 VSA chapter 5, and we think of this as our umbrella at OPR. These laws apply to all professions, and they regard things like general policies like regarding unprofessional conduct. So anything you could engage in for unprofessional conduct that applies to all professions would be in this Title III, Chapter 5. And other things would be military policies and other authorities that apply to all of our professions. Credentialing for people who got their education overseas, because those apply to social workers, as well as accountants, as well as osteopathic physicians. They're in this Title III umbrella chapter. So those are those resources. I'm going to hop screens really quickly over to our website. I've listed all the things here, but I think it'd be more instructive to walk you through the website really quickly as a resource. So I'm going to stop sharing. Here we go. Bear with me, folks. How do I get it to go back? Does anybody know how to make it go from Zoom to go back to the big screen?
You have to stop the share and then go in through and then share the website.
There we go. I apologize. Thank you for bearing with me there. And then over here to our all right, so I'll share again this time with our website. So this is OPR's website. You'll see here that so you'll see there are many resources of general applicability on this front page. We've got, right now we're highlighting our telehealth out-of-state and expired licensee registrations. I can get into that a little bit here today. It's somewhat unique, but it is the short term from March 31st, from tomorrow through June 30th, 2023. If you're licensed in good standing out of the state of Vermont, but wanting to provide telehealth to a patient or a client located in Vermont, you would need to register with our website to let us know that who you are, where you're licensed, and what your address is. And then you can continue practicing in Vermont. Prior to or today, and for the last 2 years since COVID, people, social workers, other healthcare professionals who are licensed in other states and choosing to provide telehealth to a Vermont located individual can do so without notifying the state at all. That changes tomorrow slightly, and there'll be more changes next January in the form of licensure, or I'm sorry, next July in the form of licensure. So that's progressing, but more information can be found out here at our website. We've got some of the big quick things right here. So online services, you want to apply or renew your license, some general FAQs. If you want to find a professional, a list of social workers in Vermont, licensed social workers in Vermont, you can select that. Requesting a verification. If you're seeking licensure in another state, they might ask for a verification of your license in Vermont. We have some reducing barrier efforts, including working with military families, folks with criminal records, and individuals who are trained outside of the United States or receive supervision and are seeking for licensure here in the United States. And then anytime somebody is disciplined, the conduct decision goes up on our website. As social workers, you may have questions about mandatory reporting and your obligations there. This is a discussion of that. Or you might want to file a complaint either against another social worker or another licensed professional. When somebody files a complaint, that goes to our enforcement unit. They investigate it. They may prosecute it. And we have administrative law officers who sit as judges in those cases. So here down at the bottom, again, there's that reducing barriers section, the general FAQs again. And then if you were interested in becoming a board member or advisor, you could. Because this is an advisor profession, if you were to apply as an advisor and there was an opening, we would, you'd be appointed by Secretary of State Condos rather than the governor. Board members are appointed by the governor, advisors are appointed by Secretary of State. And then just in general information down here. So the other component of our website is up here. You can find a lot of those same things. You can find about OPR. We're updating our COVID-19 response. We're trying to kind of ramp down on that and put the resources from that page on other spaces, but we're still in the process of that. We also do regulatory reviews pretty regularly. The telehealth task force was one. Lynn was part of that, as were many other stakeholders and healthcare professionals in Vermont. And so you can go there and see, the minutes of those meetings, the presentations, and the authorities for doing that. We also do legislative reports regularly, and upon request from the legislature. And we have a sunrise review, and which is if somebody wants to seek licensure. We had music therapists wanted to seek a specific credential licensure a couple of years ago, and we have a process for reviewing whether that's necessary, or whether that's good state policy. So that's the general information. Most folks, when they're coming to our website, are looking for specific information. So you'd select professions, and these are all the professions we regulate. Sadly, you guys are low in the alphabet, so you're at the bottom of the page, but you would just select social workers. And this whole page is then dedicated to social workers. The most important thing for online, if you select online services, you'll be taken to the opportunity to access or create your licensing account. That's where you would renew. That's where you would submit any documentation for continuing education. That's where you would apply for a new license. So that's online services. Statutes and rules is a great place for the statutes and the rules. So again, you've got those specific statutes in Title 26. You've got Title 3, or the statutes that govern all the professions. Here are rules that were effective until 2017, and then we've got the rules effective since 2017. We keep this up because there might be some applicants who got their education or their supervision prior to 2017, and we use those rules when we're considering those applications. And then during COVID-19, we're holding remote hearings only, and these are the rules that guide that. There's also some policies to help folks understand how the rules have been applied and interpreted, and some quick regular questions we get. I forgot my user ID. How do I apply? How do I request a verification? You can see some redundancy here with other pages in case folks get turned around or end up here rather than elsewhere. And then here are some other resources that we put up just for folks to use. The forms and instructions is also a helpful place. It has the supervision form for folks who are applying for licensure initially. And that's the supervision report, the public disclosure form that LICSWs use or provide to their patients, verification of licensure requests, and if you have a supervisor who's licensed in Canada, they can use this verification of supervisor licensure, and continuing education and application instructions. So, and you can see this, there's some CE there too. So, and then we've got it for like master social workers, as well as licensed independent clinical social workers, and guidance on the roster, which we'll get into in a few moments. We find a professional that you can look up again, that's redundant from the front page. And we've got some updated guidance on the telehealth again, your advisors in your meetings. So right now, it looks like Michael Gilman he expires as an advisor this December. So we'll have an opening at that point. If anybody's interested, please submit your application because we will be looking for somebody then. Mark Gagnon is our other one, and he goes through next December. So those are, if you're interested in that, I'm happy to chat with you as well. We don't have, with advisors, we have about one meeting a year or two public meetings a year, and then we consult regularly with them about questions that come up. We have social worker FAQs. If you're interested in filing a complaint or seeing what conduct or discipline has been issued, you can select here in the conduct and discipline area. You can file a complaint. You can conduct a social a conduct decision search. So you can just select the profession here. And a lot of this is playing around on the website. I'm going pretty fast here, but you can see, you know, the last one I see here is in 2021 was the last time there was a disciplinary matter for social work. But you can go through by name there. Let's see. And I stand corrected. If anybody receives their supervision out of state, we might seek that. Well, we would seek that verification of supervisor credential, verification of supervisor licensure. And I'll get into that later, but it's because there's requirements to be a supervisor. And so we seek verification. If we can't verify it through our in-state licensing mechanisms, we ask for the form because it's from out of state. So that is our website. I'm going to exit out. Are there any questions on that? Okay, so we'll go back to our this one. It's not letting me. Okay, fine. I will share it from here and then I will make it big. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Everybody can see that. So this is a lot of words on this slide, but this is the scope of practice. So there's two types of social work licensing in Vermont. The first is a licensed master's social work license. This, you can read the scope of practice for yourself. It includes the application of knowledge and advanced practice skills in the area of assessment, treatment planning, implementation, evaluation, case management, information and referral. The key to this is that it is social work, but it is not psychotherapy. So if you have a licensed master social worker license, an LMSW, you may not provide psychotherapy. You must either be on the roster in addition to having the LMSW to provide psychotherapy, or most people pursue their licensed independent clinical social worker license, an LICSW. And that comes next. So this is the description of the specialized area of social work, clinical social work. This is the scope of practice. And this is important because when people practice outside their scope, it doesn't happen in the mental health professionals as often. Other areas we might, for example, get a chiropractor asking if they can administer an IV, or an optometrist asking if they can do minor surgery. So that's kind of where we use the scopes of practice more. Here, the distinction between a licensed master's social worker and a licensed independent clinical social worker is in this scope. LICSWs can provide psychotherapy as well as the other social work skills and services. And really, I think what a lot of folks are here today, or today we'll get right down to the meat, and is the steps to licensure. Education and examination are pretty straightforward. Masters or you need a master's or doctoral degree from a social work education program accredited by the CSWE, and that's for both LMSWs and for LICSWs. Within 5 years prior to applying for licensure, so within 5 years of your final application for licensure, when you've acquired all of your supervision, you've done all of your education, you need to pass your exam. For LMSWs, that's the master's level examination. And for LICSWs, that's the clinical examination. And the key here is that if you have taken the exam and you have then gone on and taken a long time to do your supervision, you may need to retake your exam. So make sure you've applied for your final license within 5 years of taking that exam. If you took your exam prior to 2017, come talk to us, and we'll have a discussion about whether we can accept that score because of a change in rules in 2017. But post 20, if you now we're 5 years away from 2017, if you took your exam in January 2017 and you haven't completed your supervision yet, that exam needs to be retaken. So that's to be clear. The other exam, which is not very significant and is an open book and basically is to test you on these rules and to test you on our statutes, is the Vermont jurisprudence examination. That's for both LMSWs and LICSWs. It's a PDF as part of the application, I believe. You download it, take the examination, upload your answer key. Diane looks at it to make sure you passed. That's it. It's I think 20 to 30 questions in that realm. Here's where we get into the nitty gritty, and there's a lot of words on these slides. Again, I'll provide them as references later. I tried to break it down clearly. So supervision only is required to obtain the licensed independent clinical social worker license. The biggest thing we see and the biggest hurt for all of us is somebody who gets all of their supervision hours and was not on the roster. We cannot accept those hours toward licensure. The statutes in the law and the rules are very clear that you must be on the roster while accruing supervision hours, even if you have an LMSW. Because remember, the roster is, the LMSW does not allow you to provide psychotherapy. The roster allows you to provide psychotherapy. When you're acquiring supervision hours, you are providing psychotherapy per definition of what those hours need to be. So in order to do that in Vermont, you must be on this roster of non-licensed, non-certified professionals. The application is just an attestation to being consistent with your taxes, or up to date with your taxes, up to date with child support. And if you're not, we can help with that, as can the Department of Taxes. It's a registration. Anybody's eligible. You don't need to demonstrate any qualifications. The purpose of the roster is to ensure that we know, OPR knows, that a state entity knows who's practicing psychotherapy in the state and can remove somebody from that practice if they engage in unprofessional conduct. It's also a resource for the clients out there who want to know that, hey, this person I'm seeking care from has engaged in unprofessional conduct. So bottom line, underline, bold, 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 you must be on the roster while getting your supervised hours. The other components of being on the roster is you'll have to make a public disclosure. You'll have to upload it, but it's what you supervisors provide already, essentially, or you social workers provide to your clients already. So it's kind of part of that practice is, as a roster professional, you have to make a public disclosure to your clients at the first meeting, or within 3 meetings, of I am a rostered psychotherapist. Here's how you file a complaint. Here's where my skill and my education come from. Very similar to what social workers provide. So, and there's a template public disclosure form on our website under the forms and instructions if folks ever need to look to that. So that is, just very emphatically get on the roster. If you are not an LICSW and you are seeking to become one and you're providing psychotherapy toward getting that license, you can also, and you can find the allied, when you're looking on our website, that list of professions. I don't want to flip back, so it'll take just as long to flip back. But when you're looking at that list of professions, it's under allied mental health professionals. It even says in parentheses next to it, roster of non-licensed, non-certified. So that's where you'd find the application to join that. And I think that's linked from our statutes and rules page as well on the social worker page. All right. I've been emphatic enough. 3,000 hours of supervision are necessary post-degree. Usually the process is, well, so of those 3,000 hours, they're broken down into direct and indirect. 2,000 hours must be psychotherapy and they must be direct service hours. Direct is defined as time spent with a client directly, regardless of setting, or in consulting with another professional about the client. So that consulting part might not necessarily be psychotherapy, but it's consulting about the psychotherapy provided to a client. It may include a phone time or emergency time with the client, but overall it involves being with the client or the client's other service providers regarding psychotherapy provided to that.
Lauren, if I can interrupt, I think now might be a good time to like the definition of psychotherapy, because I think that's what gets people confused, because psychotherapy is not just the 50-minute hour in an office.
Correct. It does. I'll pull up that definition right now. But Lynn, you are making me do my screen transition again. So here we go.
I apologize.
No, not at all. Don't, of course. All right. So this would be helpful as well. So I'll go to professions. Right here, you can see that allied mental health roster. Go down to social workers, statutes and rules. And when I select social work statutes, it takes me over to the General Assembly and the entire compendium of Vermont statutes online. Specifically, it takes me to that Title 26, Chapter 61, social workers. And in definitions, I get my scopes of practice. And here we have psychotherapy. So I'll blow this up a little bit. So as Lynn mentioned, psychotherapy is it's not necessarily providing private practice care. It can be the provision of treatment, diagnosis, evaluation, or counseling services to individuals or groups in return for consideration. So that's whether you're salaried or being paid directly. And that can be money or trade or barter. So for the purpose of alleviating mental disorders. It involves the application of therapeutic techniques to understand motivation and resolve emotional relationship or attitudinal conflicts or modify behavior that interferes with effective emotional, social, or mental functioning. It's a systematic procedure of therapeutic intervention that takes place on a regular basis over a period of time, which kind of leads you to the it does need to be a 50-minute thing, but it can also occur in the case of evaluation and brief psychotherapies in a single or limited number of interventions. And there is some exemptions for the definition of psychotherapy if you're working with the Agency of Human Services. And so you should know that you're not providing psychotherapy if you're providing life skills training or instruction, or to interactions of employees or contracted individuals with clients whose job description or contract specifications do not specifically mention psychotherapy as a job responsibility or duty. So if you're contracted or you're employed and psychotherapy is a part of maybe what you do, but is not a main part, so that such that it's not part of your job description, then it's not, those hours worked in that profession would not, or in that employment would not count toward providing psychotherapy, the 2,000 hours. If you're employed by or under contract with AHS, you're not providing psychotherapy if you don't have a master's degree, is that first sentence. So this is a very broad definition, and Lynn and I have talked about this a little bit. There are certain roles where you might be doing a mix of things, from casework to teaching these life skills, to spending time one-on-one with a client, providing supervision or providing psychotherapy and helping them with to resolve an emotional relationship or attitudinal conflict, or modify a behavior. And you can count that time where you're working to modify a behavior, as long as, if you're employed, this last sentence here, if you're, one of the settings we've talked about is the hospital setting. So if you're employed as a medical social worker and your job description doesn't say you're to provide psychotherapy to the patients, then this would exempt you from that. This would mean this statute says you can't count your hours, essentially. If that medical social worker job description says provide psychotherapy to a patient, provide casework to a patient, provide life skill teaching to a patient of the hospitals, then you can count the time you spend in psychotherapy with a patient toward your supervised hours. You can't count the casework time. You can't count the compilation of resources and consulting with other members of the community to, find housing, find other, rehabilitative services. That cannot be counted toward your 2,000 hours. Time spent directly with the patient or consulting with the patient's psychiatrist about modifying behavior, about psychotherapeutic interventions for that patient can be counted. So it's a matter of delineation when you're doing your work day. Hey, I spent 10 hours direct one-on-one with the patient. This week I spent 10 hours doing casework. I did 5 hours of other services. And then those 10 hours, you'll need a minimum of 16 per week. So you need it. So if you're in one of these positions, you need to, and it's not fully psychotherapy all the time, and you want to start acquiring supervision hours toward licensure, you need to make sure of a couple things. One, you're getting at least 16 hours of psychotherapy every week. Two, you're using that your job description says that you're to provide psychotherapy. So those are the minimum blocks to check here in that range. I'd like to flip back over to my slides, but I can put in the chat here the link to the definition of, maybe I can, I'm going to stop sharing here. Here, I can put it right here.
I can put it in there as well.
Thank you, Lynn.
Oh, you got it.
So that's the definition. That's a link to the statutes if you have questions. I'm going to flip back to the slides so that we can see more of those details again about what is needed. Here we go. So come back up. All right. So 2,000 direct service hours. There's a definition of indirect service hours in the rules as well. I don't have that in front of me, but it could be direct. Your other 1,000 hours, but it's record keeping, note taking, all of that stuff counts as your indirect administrative tasks related to providing psychotherapy care. So that can be 1,000 hours. This is the direct. We've walked through that. So 2,000 of the 3,000 must be in psychotherapy. 1,000 can be indirect or direct. Face-to-face supervision is another place we get confusion, and it is confusing. So you must have 1 hour of face-to-face supervision, so sitting down with a supervisor, for every 30 hours of practice, supervised practice you do. That means out of the 3,000 hours of supervised practice, you need 100 hours of face-to-face sit-down time with your supervisor. That can be, in at least half of that sit-down face-to-face time has to be in an individual setting. The other 50 hours can be in a group setting or individual. So that's a lot, but it's a lot of math. Basically, it boils down to you need 3,000 hours of supervised practice altogether in a setting where your supervisor is responsible for your practice, including knowing that you're on the roster, and who's overseeing your caseload, who's working with you to develop the skills, psychotherapy skills. And then you need of that, of those 3,000 hours, every time you have 30 hours, you need to sit down and have a face-to-face or in a group setting with your supervisor, and at least 50 of those hours face-to-face. Here's some more details. So no fewer than half of the hours must occur within 5 years of completing the requirements for licensure. So you need to have at least 1,500 hours within the 5 years of completing your license. And then in addition to that, you can't have, there's a max and a minimum per year. 1,500 hours of supervised practice every year, no fewer than 16 hours per week. So that's this is your part-time minimum and your full-time maximum. To be just an awareness, applications will expire after 5 years. You'll need to start again. Or in our NGLP system, so where you apply online, that's the software we use. If you have not been approved to sit for an exam, you've started an application, but you've not moved through the process and just let it sit for 6 months, it'll expire. You'll have to apply again, pay a fee again. So be sure you're ready to start and then keep going, or talk with Diane or I so we can keep the application alive somehow.
And Lauren, 2 questions that are in the chat. Can the face-to-face supervision be over Zoom?
Yes, right now it can be. We're going to have to modify some rules in the near future about remote supervision. I believe social work is actually, we rely on CSWE for that guidance, and I need to check back to make sure that they're still permitting remote supervision.
And then is there a formal process for recording or reporting your hours?
Yes, so there's in that forms and instructions page. Oh, good. The rules that you can do. So in the instructions, forms and instructions page, there's a supervisor form, and that is where you would record your hours. There's also a way to record, I've had my face-to-face time, and here's total hours I practiced, and here are the hours I've spent with my supervisor directly. It is okay to get over 1,500 hours a year, but you will only get credit for a maximum of 1,500 supervised hours. Yes, you can have more than one. You guys gotta slow down. You can have more than one supervisor. Yes, I don't believe we've got, Diane, you can shake your head or answer. We don't have a 500-hour minimum for supervisors in social work, correct? Sorry, you're on mute, Diane. We would look at your job description, and often we rely on the honesty and the attestation of applicants to say their work providing psychotherapy, and of the supervisor. So the supervisor no, so Diane, in licensed clinical mental health, they have to have 500 hours per supervisor, a minimum of 500 hours. We don't have something similar in social work. I believe you can do all or parts with their, okay, great. Thank you, Diane. So you could do all or parts with supervisors with different hours. And I will get to the qualifications too, Diane, thank you. So um, sorry. So the supervisor is responsible for the applicant, and the applicant's responsible as well. So if the applicant or the supervisor is lying to us about providing psychotherapy, that's going to be problematic. If it's a mistake, a genuine mistake, and you thought something qualified, it's not going to be a problem. So we do rely significantly on the honesty and of applicants. For the 16 hours per week, that's total. So if you're doing 16 hours a week, 52, I can't do the math on that one. If you're doing 16 hours a week for 52 weeks a year, I think it'll probably come down to, it'll take you 5 years to get your 3,000 hours. My guess that probably estimate you're doing 16 hours a week, 50 hours or 50 weeks a year. So my guess, Eli, is that it would be in total, in aggregate, you need to have that split of 2,000 direct, 1,000 indirect. It wouldn't be by week. So if you had 1 week that was completely indirect and 1 week that was 2 weeks that were completely direct, it would all come out in the wash, as long as over the entire course of your supervision, you had 1 hour to every 30 hours. Can you provide the link to the supervisory hour? Yes, I can. No, so supervision and practice hours do not need to occur in Vermont. I'm going to flip to my next slide because I think that'll help too. They can occur in any state. As we mentioned before, there's a verification of licensure for supervisors, form for supervisors from out of state. So if you're getting your supervision out of state, you'll want to submit the verification form for your supervisor. We need to verify that your supervisor has an unencumbered, that means and the supervisor would still need to meet the requirements of this rule. So that's where the verification form comes in. We need to verify that your supervisor meets these rules. That they have at least 3 years of practice and 4,500 hours of practice. That they have an unencumbered, that means their license has not been disciplined or conditioned or restricted in any other way in the other state. And they must be licensed in one of these professions. The LICSW, a licensed clinical mental health counselor, a licensed psychologist, or a licensed physician who's completed a residency in psychiatry. So those are the requirements, and that's why the person has to be licensed in the jurisdiction where the supervision occurs. So if you get your supervision in Arizona, the psychologist who supervised your practice there needs to have 4,500 hours of licensed practice, have been practicing for no more than 3 years, have an unencumbered license, and needs to be licensed in Arizona. And that would all go on that verification form and be submitted to us. So that's that. The obligation of the supervisors to be familiar with the nature of the applicant's clinical activities and monitor the quality of the work, and also contribute to the enhancement of the self-knowledge and clinical work of the applicant. The supervisor is responsible for the work of the applicant. So the applicant's practicing not on the roster, or the applicant is engaging in unprofessional conduct, the supervisor is responsible for that. And then, of course, there's ethical and conflict requirements as well in the rule. You can't be the parent or spouse of somebody you're supervising. There's discussion about romantic relationships, that sort of situation, and the codes of ethics apply. All right, so I've answered some questions. That's all I had. That's a lot, and I've taken up quite a bit of time. Are there questions that I can answer about this? I'm gonna escape. Yes. So that is not there's been a lot of discussion in recent times about when the exam can be taken. Vermont has always permitted applicants to take the exam as soon as their education is approved in our system. And then there's been some discussion on the national by the ASWB, who offers the exam, about when that should be taken. Right now, they've paused the requirement that it needs to be taken immediately after, after all the supervision's been done. They'll allow folks to take the clinical exam at this point in time, after this, as soon as the state approves them, which can be as soon as your education's approved. So I'm seeing so sorry, I'm trying to go back.
Is it easier for you if I read the questions out?
No, I think I'm handling, if you think I'm dragging.
Nope, I just want whatever's easiest for you, Lauren.
I'm doing great, I think. I hope.
You are.
A little bit of hubris there. Can you get your license before 2 years of being rostered? No, and it's because of that 1,500 hours maximum per year. You need 3,000 hours of supervised practice, and you can only count up to 1,500 hours per year. So you need a minimum of 2 years of supervision. And unless you hold another license that allows you to provide psychotherapy, you're a psychologist or a licensed clinical mental health counselor, you need to be on the roster for those full 2 years. One doesn't need to register for the jurisprudence exam. When, I believe, and Diane, correct me if I'm wrong, when you start an application for a license and you submit your education, you'll have an opportunity to download the jurisprudence exam from the NGLP application. And so it's within the application, you download it, it's a PDF, it's a little like circle bubble form and a list of questions. You answer them, and then you scan it or take a picture of it and put it and attach it to your application and submit it, and then Diane corrects it from there. Unfortunately, I mean, I'm glad to entertain, Natalie, a question regarding billing and supervision. It's not something we have have jurisdiction over, and so I can give you the resource for whom to ask about that. Natalie, do you want to offer the question?
Sure. It's just, I've heard, a few people that are doing private practice. A few of them had said that someone can bill under them and receive supervision by them, and others have said you have to have a different supervisor if you're billing under them. So I've heard a lot of conflicting, so I just wanted clarification.
So that's a good question. I think I'm going to pull up the rules over here. In other professions, and I believe it's the same here, the supervisor should not be financially benefiting from the the applicant's practice. I'm pulling up my, and I can share the screen too. Rules here. You can see this. Yeah. So you don't have a specific requirement regarding financial, I see. You're supposed to discuss, and so that all issues arising from practice in the practice setting can be adequately addressed. Financial relationships between supervisor and supervisee. So in this profession, if you're billing and receiving financial benefit from the work being done by the applicant, you need to make that clear to the supervisee. Let them know that that is the financial relationship that's being that exists. In other professions, mental health professions, the person who's supervising cannot be gaining from the practice of the applicant. So for a clinical mental health licensure, for example, the person supervising if you're in a practice, that cannot be the one that's getting the benefit, the financial benefit of the additional hours being billed by and the additional services being billed by the applicant. Rather, maybe in like a big practice, the supervisor's salaried and they don't get any extra benefit if the applicant works an additional 20 hours that week or sees an extra 2 or 3 patients that week. The supervisor is not gaining from that. And that's obviously to prevent the supervisor's feedback and work to enhance the practice of the supervisee to be colored, or their evaluation of the supervisee's ability to be colored by the financial benefit they're receiving. For social work, there are ethical codes that apply. The NASW Code of Ethics applies. The NASWB Code of Ethics apply. And so for that reason, it seems to say that you should be completely forthright and discuss your financial relationships before interacting or before engaging in this sense. So Linda, I see your hands up.
Hey, Laura. So we know each other. So in the past, there is a DCF person who wants to get licensed, and that person, because DCF doesn't provide supervision, would that in the past, would that DCF worker go outside and pay for outside supervisor? Is that still the case if someone's work is providing the hours but unable to provide supervision? Can this still be arranged, and would the supervisor get paid?
Yeah, so the supervisor, it's typically a financial relationship, at least in terms of the supervisee pays the supervisor to do the supervision. And some agencies in the state, I know some designated agencies will provide supervision. I believe the Howard Center does it. Some don't, but some do, will allow work time to also be counted for supervision. Other areas do not. So you'll, like you said, you'll be providing psychotherapy or even social work services as an employee of DCF, but that work will not count. You can't use it as supervised hours. It really comes down to whether there's no requirement to pay for it. You need this formal relationship that's discussed in the rules. So you need an agreement between supervisee and supervisor to engage in in that relationship. And then you need the supervisor at the end of the time to sign the forms for you to be submitted to OPR. One of the things OPR strongly recommends is putting that in writing, or at least an email or something to discuss. We have had really hard situations where at the end of where the supervisor moves away, the supervisor retires, the supervisor passes away, and the person who had paid money for and engaged in 1,500 hours of supervised practice now can't use them. It's hard for them to use them toward licensure. We try to work with folks, but we do need some indication that they're adequate practitioners in order to protect the public. So that's what that supervisor report does for us. It says, hey, this person, and you might get a really bad, or not a bad, but like an initial report your first year and your first 100 hours of practice saying, we don't think this person's ready for independent practice, But then after 2 years, you get a glowing report from a supervisor that says, Joe is great. They're going to be an amazing provider. They're all set to be independent provider at this time. OPR is not going to deny the license because that first report wasn't glowing. But we do need the reports. And I'm sorry, Linda, I know I strayed a little bit from your initial point, but the underlining point I want to make is make sure you have that discussion and there's an understanding that there's a supervisor-supervisee relationship, and that your supervisor is going to do the one-on-one with you the 100 hours of one-on-one with you, and accepts responsibility for your practice and is going to submit the reports for you. at the end of that year. Yes, Steve, I can provide the link. It is right here. Oop, that's the supervisor. That's the form. You want the supervisor form? There you go. Let's see. Really quickly, an LMSW is not requirement for providing casework. I know a lot of our designated agencies have caseworkers that don't hold a credential. Group supervision, I don't think it needs to be run by anybody, but your supervisor, it needs to be face-to-face with your supervisor. So your supervisor should be in the group at least. It doesn't require that the group, it says in a group setting, including the supervisor and up to 8 individuals. So that's clear. And let's see, can you be rostered while in the process of, yes, you can be rostered at any time you'd like. You can be rostered. I don't think you even need a high school diploma. I think you have to be 18.
And Lauren and everybody, for you to know, I just put 2 documents into the chat. One is a contract template for supervision, and another is a weekly form. I mean, these aren't required, but this might be the type of thing that you and your supervisor might use. And that's documentation. Remember, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So this type of template and form can help guide not only your supervision, but provide documentation for you and be a jumping off point in your conversations with your soon-to-be supervisor.
Great. Yes. As a lawyer, I love hearing that documentation. Chelsea, I'm sure there's a gray area here, but I'm going to say yes, supervisors need to have access to the same client information as the supervisee. There may be some nuance of the practice of social work I'm not understanding, but the supervisor really is the one responsible for that entire case. The supervisee might be practicing and providing the psychotherapy, but it's the supervisor also providing the psychotherapy. Bye, everybody who's heading out. Thank you for joining us. So yes, they should have I'm sure there's always a situation in which there should be, some distinction between who has access to the information, but for the 99.999% of the time, the supervisor needs to have access to the same information as the supervisee about a patient and about the case. Right, let me see. Usually we just get a usually we just get the supervisor reports when it's been done, like you're finished with that supervisor. It might be helpful, especially as Lynn says, to get it signed off on in chunks so that you don't end up with 1,500 hours and he just, they stop practicing and you lose all your time. Maybe get it signed off every month or something. You'll see it in the supervision form. There's also, it's not just about the hours, it's also about an evaluation. But if you're doing that, keep those things for your file and only do it, do your hours every month, but don't do the evaluation every month. Just keep your hours every month and then keep it in your file and then submit it as one part of your application. Right. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any hands, Lynn, but I assume.
And forgive me if you did answer this, can you be rostered while in the process of completing an MSW or DSW?
Yes, you can be rostered at any time.
Yes.
So I could go be rostered today. There's no educational or age. I think you have to be 18.
Because everybody wants an 18-year-old psychotherapist.
Right.
Sorry.
The market
Sorry for that
decides.
editorial
The market
comment.
decides on that.
So I am going to, I need to be respectful of people's time, and Lauren's and Diane's. Thank you so much for being here. Lauren, if you have a couple more minutes, if people do have questions, but I'll stop the recording and put people in gallery view. Okay, here, oh, let me put my camera on. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We will stay on for a couple minutes to answer questions, but I'm stopping the recording now. And I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you all.